So I am sitting here with Lieutenant Governor Bill Bolling after what was yesterday a very hectic day, and I guess, Lieutenant Governor, walk us through what happened in the Senate yesterday afternoon.
Well, I'm glad it's behind us. It was a tough day, but we had to deal with the organizational issues. Getting the Senate organized with a 2020 Democrat-Republican split isn't easy, but we got that done. We've organized the Senate with an effective Republican majority. That means that we have a Republican majority leader and floor leader. We have Republican committee chairs, Republican majorities on all but one of the committees in the Senate. Those organizational issues are never easy, but hopefully, now that they're behind us, we can get down to doing the work that the people of Virginia sent us here to do.
Now, many of us needed a translator to try to figure out what exactly was going down yesterday, but I think the gist of it seemed to be that Senator McEachin had proposed a floor substitute to the rules bill, which would kind of dictate the rules of the game in the Senate, and that went up for a 2020 vote and was ultimately rejected by your tie. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. The critical vote yesterday was the vote on the adoption of rules, because everything else that we did were discussed and covered in the rules, and we had prepared a rules report that came from the Senate Republican caucus. Senator McEachin had prepared a rules report that came from the Senate Democratic caucus. That report was voted on first. It was voted down and on a 21-20 vote. And then the report of the Senate Republican caucus was approved on a 21-20 vote. And with those rules adopted, we were then able to proceed with the organization of the Senate.
It seemed to me like there were two primary contentious issues, at least for the Democrats, one of which being that the Republicans were kind of making up the rules as they go along and changing what had been the template for the last several sessions by allowing you to break ties of organizational matters, as well as some other innuendos there. I mean, do you think that that's a fair contention on their part?
No, I don't think it's fair at all. In fact, the changes that we made to the rules, for the most part, were intended to be clarifying changes. For example, there had been some question about whether the Lieutenant Governor could vote on committee assignments. I've always maintained that the Lieutenant Governor had full constitutional authority to vote on committee assignments, but we felt it was important to simply clarify that, to spell out in the rules that yes, the Lieutenant Governor does have that right to vote, so we spelled that out in the rules. There were a number of other issues we addressed in the rules that we thought were clarifying. They were updating rules that had not been updated for 4 years. So I think the rules that we adopted will be good rules to operate under, fair rules to operate under, and there's nothing unusual about that. Every 4 years when a new Senate is seated, rules are adopted, and it's not unusual for those rules to have changes from one session of the General Assembly to the next.
The exchange that occurred between Senator Edwards and Senator Norment over this idea of striking out proportionately, or as closely as possible, proportionally representing the Democrats and Republicans each in those committee assignments, that was what really drew the ire of Senator Edwards. So you're saying that is a fair, appropriate modification in the words of Senator Norment?
Well, yeah, I think it was a fair modification. The language that was in there in the past said that there would be proportional representation as nearly as practicable, and that in the past has given both parties the ability to basically do whatever they wanted to do. We felt that language was fairly meaningless the way it was previously written, and by removing it, it didn't really affect the outcome. In fact, if you look at the composition of the Senate, on most of the committees there are 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. There are a couple exceptions to that. One committee that in fact has 10 Democrats and only 5 Republicans, and then one committee that has more Republicans than it has Democrats. But overall, the number of Republican committee assignments and the number of Democrat committee assignments are pretty consistent in this composition of the Senate as they've been in the past. So while I understand that our Democratic friends didn't like some of the changes that we made with organization, elections have consequences. And we have 20 Republicans and a Republican Lieutenant Governor, and that gives us the ability to organize the Senate with a working Republican majority. That's exactly what we did.
And lastly, sir, you think that the courts will support your idea that you have the constitutional right, Virginia constitutionally based right, to cast that vote in organizational matters?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I tried to look at the Constitution very objectively. I put forth a detailed memorandum spelling out my interpretation of my constitutional authority. It's clear to me that there's nothing in the Constitution that limits the Lieutenant Governor. in his capacity as President of the Senate from voting on organizational matters. So that's what I did. And my thought is, and my hope is, that if the court decides to hear the case, that they'll come to that same conclusion.
Lieutenant Governor Bill Bolling, after a whirlwind first 24 hours of the Senate 2012, first day of the General Assembly, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Sam.